In the ancient land of Israel, where kings ruled and prophets whispered divine messages, a tale of intrigue and betrayal unfolded during the reign of the famed King David. This is the story of Uriah the Hittite, a man of unwavering loyalty, courage, and honor in the midst of a kingdom where power, temptation, and deception loomed like shadows. Uriah, a Hittite by birth, had found his place among the warriors of Israel's army. His reputation was not forged by the metal of his sword alone, but by the steadfastness of his character and the nobility of his heart. Uriah was a man who stood as a pillar of honor in King David's court. As the sun kissed the walls of Jerusalem, bathing the city in golden light, and the fragrant breeze from the Mediterranean caressed the land, this story begins with the fateful intersection of three lives: Uriah, the valiant warrior; Bathsheba, a woman of beauty and grace; and King David, a ruler both beloved and flawed. Amidst this enchanting backdrop, a tale of love, betrayal, and divine retribution would unfurl, forever etching Uriah's name into the annals of biblical history. Within the grandeur of King David's palace, where marble columns soared towards the heavens and servants moved in hushed reverence, there existed a world far removed from the battlefield where Uriah had earned his renown. The opulence of the palace, with its sumptuous feasts, fragrant gardens, and glistening jewels, was a stark contrast to the rugged life of a soldier. Amidst the extravagance, King David sat on his balcony, gazing out across the rooftops of Jerusalem. His reign had brought prosperity and power to the land of Israel, yet a sense of restlessness had settled upon his soul. One evening, David's restless eyes fell upon a sight that would set the wheels of fate into motion. From his vantage point, David observed a woman of surpassing beauty bathing on a rooftop nearby. Her name was Bathsheba, and she was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of David's most loyal and valiant warriors. Bathsheba's ebony hair cascaded like a waterfall down her back, and her skin glowed like polished bronze in the fading light. She moved with a grace that seemed to defy gravity itself, and David, unable to tear his gaze away, was consumed by a desire he could not deny. In that moment, the lines of loyalty and temptation blurred in King David's heart. Lust, like a fire, raged within him, overpowering reason and morality. He desired Bathsheba with an intensity that left him powerless to resist. Unable to contain his longing, David sent for Bathsheba, and she was brought to the palace. Their clandestine affair began, hidden from the eyes of Uriah and the kingdom, shrouded in a veil of secrecy. As the days turned into weeks, Bathsheba's secret pregnancy grew increasingly apparent, casting a shadow over the palace. King David, burdened by guilt and the weight of his illicit affair, knew that he had to act swiftly to protect his reputation and maintain his hold on the throne. With cunning born of desperation, David devised a plan to conceal his sin. He reasoned that if Uriah the Hittite could be persuaded to spend a night with his wife, the child's paternity could be attributed to him. The king believed this would safeguard his honor and quell any rumors that might threaten his rule. Summoning Uriah from the battlefield, David greeted him warmly, feigning concern for his loyal warrior's well-being. Uriah, unaware of the true nature of the king's intentions, stood before David with unwavering devotion. "Uriah," David began, his voice tinged with false concern, "you have been valiant on the battlefield, and your loyalty to me and to our kingdom is unwavering. But I fear for your health and well-being. You have been away from home for too long. Go to your house, rest, and be with your wife." Uriah, ever the embodiment of integrity, responded with a solemn oath, "May the Lord live, and may my lord the king live. As long as my comrades are in the field, I could not bear to enjoy the comforts of home." David's heart sank as he realized that Uriah's steadfastness and honor were a formidable obstacle to his plan. His attempt to manipulate Uriah had failed, and the looming threat of exposure pressed upon him like a suffocating darkness. Despite the king's insistence, Uriah refused to go home to Bathsheba while his fellow soldiers still faced danger on the battlefield. His loyalty to his comrades and his unwavering commitment to duty would unwittingly seal his fate, and set the stage for a tragic turn of events that would forever alter the course of their lives. With the failure of his initial plan to cover up his affair with Bathsheba, King David found himself ensnared in a web of deceit that threatened to unravel at any moment. Uriah the Hittite's unyielding loyalty had thwarted the king's efforts to conceal his transgression, and David's desperation deepened. Uriah remained resolute in his commitment. He showed no sign of faltering, and each passing day weighed heavily on David's conscience. In a chamber of the palace, the king paced back and forth, his brow furrowed with worry. His advisors, aware of the situation, whispered among themselves, questioning the king's unusual behavior. David knew that he needed a new plan, a way to remove Uriah from the equation without arousing suspicion. With a heavy heart, David devised a scheme more sinister than the last. He composed a letter to Joab, the commander of his army, sealed with the king's royal seal. In this letter, he issued a command that would alter the course of Uriah's fate. The letter ordered Joab to place Uriah at the forefront of the fiercest battle, where the fighting was most intense. David's intention was clear, though it remained unspoken. Uriah would be sent to the front lines, where the risk of death was highest. Oblivious to the deadly command contained within, he never opened the letter, though in it contained the very instruction that will seal his fate eternally. With unwavering loyalty and courage, he was true to his king even when no one was watching him. As Uriah made his way back to the battlefield, the destiny that awaited him on the front lines loomed ominously. David's actions, driven by guilt, lust, and the desire to protect his throne, had set in motion a tragic and irreversible chain of events that would forever alter the lives of those entangled in this web of deceit and betrayal. The battlefield echoed with the clamor of clashing swords and the thunderous roar of warriors engaged in fierce combat. Uriah, the valiant Hittite, stood at the forefront of the battle, leading his fellow soldiers with unwavering determination. His every movement was marked by a sense of duty and honor that inspired those around him. As the battle raged on, the king's sinister plan unfolded. Uriah's comrades fought valiantly alongside him, unaware of the treacherous command that had placed him in harm's way. Arrows whizzed through the air, and the ground trembled with the fury of the conflict. In the midst of the chaos, Uriah's fate was sealed. A hail of arrows descended upon him like a deadly rainstorm, and he fell, struck down by the very forces he had bravely led into battle. News of Uriah's death reached King David's ears, and a chilling realization gripped his heart. The king had achieved his sinister goal, but at a cost far greater than he could have ever anticipated. Uriah, the loyal and honorable Hittite, had paid the ultimate price for David's lust and deceit. Bathsheba, now a widow, mourned the loss of her husband. Her tears, like silent witnesses to the tragedy, fell for both the man she had loved and the child she now carried, a child conceived in the shadow of a forbidden affair. The city of Jerusalem, unaware of the dark secrets that had unfolded within its walls, continued to bustle with life. Yet, a pall of sorrow hung over the palace, and the king's heart was heavy with guilt and regret. The tragic end of Uriah the Hittite served as a grim reminder of the consequences of David's actions, and the depths to which his lust and deception had plunged him. The death of Uriah the Hittite weighed heavily on King David's conscience. His once noble character had been tarnished by the dark choices he had made in the name of desire and deceit. Yet, the consequences of his actions were far from over, for the eyes of the Almighty had been upon him all along. In the quiet hours of the night, while the city of Jerusalem slumbered, a man clothed with anger and indignation emerged from the shadows. It was Nathan, the prophet of the Lord, a man chosen to deliver divine messages to the king. With unwavering conviction, he approached the palace, a place where secrets and sins festered. Nathan's voice, like thunder in the stillness, echoed through the palace corridors as he recounted a parable to the king, a tale of a rich man who had taken from a poor man the one cherished possession he had, a beloved lamb. The king, incensed by this injustice, declared judgment upon the rich man. As David listened to the parable, anger welled within him, and he proclaimed, "As the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. He shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity." With eyes that pierced the king's very soul, Nathan declared, "You are the man." The weight of Nathan's words bore down upon David's conscience, and he knew that the prophet's revelation was true. The rich man in the parable symbolized the king himself, who had taken Uriah's beloved wife and orchestrated his death. David's heart ached with remorse, and he fell to his knees before Nathan, confessing his sins and begging for forgiveness from the Lord. He had come face to face with the enormity of his transgressions, the betrayal of Uriah, and the violation of God's commandments. Nathan, the messenger of divine justice, assured David that the Lord had forgiven him, but the consequences of his actions would not be easily erased. The child conceived in sin would not survive, and the sword would not depart from David's house, bringing turmoil and tragedy in the days to come. With a heavy heart, David accepted the gravity of his actions and the judgment of the Lord. As the days passed, the weight of David's transgressions pressed upon him, casting a shadow over his reign. The death of Uriah the Hittite, and the revelation by the prophet Nathan had shaken the foundation of his kingdom. But David, known for his humility and deep faith, did not crumble under the burden of guilt. Instead, he turned to the only source of solace and redemption he knew, his relationship with the Almighty. In the solitude of his chamber, David poured out his heart to the Lord. He composed psalms, poignant and soul-searching, that reflected his contrition and longing for forgiveness. One of these psalms, known as Psalm 51, would go down in history as a powerful testament to David's remorse and his plea for divine mercy. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. The sincerity of David's repentance touched the heart of the Lord, and in his infinite mercy, God forgave David for his sins. But the consequences of those sins still reverberated throughout the kingdom. The legacy of Uriah the Hittite, the loyal warrior whose life had been sacrificed to David's sins, served as a stark reminder of the consequences of transgression, but it also underscored the potential for forgiveness and redemption through faith and contrition. In the annals of Israel's history, the name Uriah the Hittite would forever be remembered not only as a valiant warrior who loved the Lord and the safety of his people, but also as a symbol of loyalty, honor, and the tragic consequences of betrayal. His life, his death, and the events that followed left an indelible mark on the kingdom and the legacy of King David. The legacy of Uriah the Hittite, once a footnote in history, had become a symbol of righteousness and innocent sacrifice. It stands as a symbol that will reveal the sacrifice of the Son of God, the innocent Lamb of God who will die to redeem mankind from the tragic consequences of sin. As Uriah, forsaken alone to die at the battlefield, so Christ was left alone and bore painfully the iniquity of all. Uriah shows us a blurry picture of the true sacrifice. Christ took upon him the form of a servant and became obedient even unto death. God the Father read the letter before his only begotten Son. Even though Christ knew the content, yet he delivered it at the cost of his life.